I've criticized concept synergy for the hypocrisy of publishing a tape called The Power of Dominion, in which Lazaris outlines the components of domination, the components of dominion, and basically said that dominion is incompatible with domination. They are opposites, and that to be a spiritual person, to go home, etc., you must let go of domination. And so concept synergy, in the last workshop I spent some little time in San Francisco, had a security guard specifically in front of the Lazaris seminar room. And I said, and this was new, meaning I hadn't seen security guards at former events. And so I asked the security guard what he was doing, and he said he had a list of Lazaris friends that might try to come to the event, and his job was to keep them out. And he had a gun, and he had a table, so we're clearly in the territory of domination, right? You don't have security guards with guns to facilitate dominion. Concept synergy had failed to maintain amicable relationships with their clients, and had failed more in recent years than in earlier years, because there weren't security guards in earlier years, and this just seemed like the ultimate joke, right? Security guards to stop Lazaris friends from paying, like entering the prostitution relationship, because Lazaris is the only person that I know that defines friendship as you show up on our terms to talk about what we want, when we want to do it, where we want to do it, and pay us this amount of money, and then we can be friends. But no, that's not good enough. If you show up and try to listen to our lecture, you'll be thrown out, right? And so the whole betrayal of we'll never leave you, we'll love you forever, means basically you'll be met at gunpoint when you try to attend a seminar. So, very critical of concept synergy about that. But my criticism is moving closer towards Lazaris, and I'll show you why, and how that has evolved for me. Meaning why, I would say that the fault, to the extent that there is one, well, of course, it lies with concept synergy in the sense that they are arrogant and have provided poorer and more extreme and expensive service in areas than many companies that I can think of. And so, of course, I do criticize concept synergy for alienating their clients systematically with extreme arrogance and spiritual blackmail, and throwing people out of the forum for expressing dissenting opinions. This whole conversation would occur in the forum in a healthy way, were it not for concept synergy blackmail, which is basically that highest being who's ever going to touch the planet and who said he's going to love you forever. Well, you're not going to be able to connect with that if you do anything that, or say anything, or think anything that, that we don't like. And so, massive spiritual blackmail. And of course, that's going to, enrage and make crazy making. And so, of course, that type of behavior may result in rage, and then their refusal to address any of these complaints more than almost any other business, is astounding. So yes, I absolutely criticize concept synergy for their abominable treatment in a monopoly relationship with a spiritual prostitute is what it amounts to, because you've got to pay for every interaction with your friend. But I think Lazaris has it wrong also, meaning the fact that concept synergy needs to hire a security guard versus putting up with, I guess the horror of having to deal with the angered friends of Lazaris that they've pissed off over the years. I think that Lazaris has it off more than concept synergy in terms of the dichotomy of domination and dominion, and the supposition that if you just focus on dominion, that things will all work out. The first thing about this is to understand that we have 4 brains and 4 operating systems. So the base brain, the oldest brain, is the reptilian brain. And this orients to fight, flight, and freeze in animals. And for human animals with the rational brain, it also includes please or ass licking, right? And so it's all done out of fear and greed, right? Because the reptilian brain doesn't have the capacity to love as a human being. It's fear and greed, and so it's one of those two things, and it's to facilitate survival. Now, the question is, did life get it wrong, right? Is the reptilian brain, the 200 million year old alligator brain, is that all wrong? That's one way of saying it, is that was a complete mistake. But if you look at the function of the reptilian brain until the present time, it's designed to meet the need of survival through competition. And so if you look at the dynamic between a lion and a herd of gazelles, the slowest lion does not hunt very well. So there's mutation, there's variation within each species, and the slowest lion doesn't hunt very well, is more malnourished, and dies out of the gene pool. The fastest lion, of course, eats very well and has healthier, more vibrant fur and all of that, and attracts healthier mates, and continues in the gene pool. But at the same time, the slowest gazelle is taken out of the gene pool, right? When the lion runs after a herd, what they hunt is the elderly, the young, and the sick, right? Or the mentally disabled, right? The slowest gazelle is, of course, at the back. And occasionally it's just bad luck, but statistically, this is the least fast of the gazelle, the elderly of the gazelle, etc. And so the lion takes them out of the gene pool. Now, what remains are the faster gazelles. Now, what this means is that the gazelles keep getting faster, bred selectively by the lions. And the lions that can catch gazelles have to keep getting faster as well to keep up, right? So this dynamic of hunting and running, fight, flight, this dynamic of fight, flight in a predatorial dance ensures that the predator must get faster and more competent in every generation. And the prey must also get faster in each generation, right? If one of those gets too out of sync, if there are too many, if the lions get fast and can just breed and kill off the entire species of gazelle, then the lions collapse as well. If the gazelles outrun all of the predators and just breed also, they may also at some point reach a point where there isn't enough grass or food for gazelles, in that dynamic. And so life has organized that dance so that it stays at about equal, right, in a natural setting. Now, the common denominator is competence, right? So competition, prey and predator in that dance, each become more competent in each generation. So if you understand that the reptilian brain is breeding for competence, 99% of all the species that have ever existed on the planet are now extinct, 99%. And we could say that, there's a very strong likelihood that in another million years, 99% of the species that are here today will either no longer exist and be replaced by new species, or will be rapidly mutating towards newer species. And so, right, the competitive protocol of the reptilian survival-oriented brain ensures that only the most intelligent species survive amongst all of the species, and that only the most intelligent members, or the most competent members, of the remaining species. So you could say that what life is doing with this protocol of competing for energy in a sociopathic form is creating the 1% of the 1%. The most competent members of the most competent species are what are here and now today, right? So, right, we're part of that 1% of 1% here today. And if you look in the sociopathic arenas of life, business, the free market economy, it is primarily sociopathic. 90% of all businesses fail within a relatively short period of time. And they fail because of a winner-take-all type of dynamic, which is happening particularly in the information age. If you can get the best information or medium information or the worst, and they're all, and there's pennies of cost to deliver it, right? Then whoever has the best information, everyone is going to go there. Everyone's going to go to the best search engine, right? And so it's kind of a winner-take-all type of, of dynamic. All those lost jobs, all those divorces, all of those disappointed dreams, they're no fun. It's profoundly sociopathic, right? We go up, right? And, 90% of all the restaurant traffic comes to this new restaurant, and it goes down in other restaurants. Now, so much of capitalism, not all of it, but much of capitalism is reptilian, is sociopathic. Sports, again, sociopathic. War, sociopathic. If you look at dating and, and mating dynamics, most women want to sleep with about 5% of the men, right? And most men want to sleep if in first pick with 5% of the women. So who jockeys in that, right? So who ends up in a mating dynamic? Again, a strong sociopathic element to that. And who wins in legal cases, right? Is it whoever was right or had the most reasonable case, or is it who has the most expensive attorneys, right? Or who has the highest rank within the cult, right? So there's a lot of the sociopathic reptilian survival protocol of might makes right. You have the most money, you win the legal battle, statistically speaking. You have the most money, you become president, statistically speaking, right? So that's a very strong theme within much of our culture, right? And if you have no locks on your doors and you have valuables, right? Statistically, you start losing your things, right? Because there was no deterrent, there was no wall, there was no lock. If you leave a bunch of cash out on a table and just say, please don't take this cash, you come back in a few days, statistically, all of that cash is gone. And yet, if you surround that same cash with a high security detail and SWAT team, right? Statistically speaking, the cash is still there. Why? Because of fear. Because of fear. And so if you look at what life gets for all of that fear and all of that competition, you could say the most competent of the most competent. You get high competency. And it seems like you need to have high competency to go from survival to security, right? So if the reptilian brain programs for survival, right? The survival of the fittest, of the most intelligent, of all of that, then the rational brain, which takes us into rational reptile, the rational brain helps us to create superabundance using reptilian protocols, but also what's called mutual self-interest, verified, based on reviews, right? Mutual self-interest. So I trust you to do what's best for you, and I trust me to do what's best for me, and you trust me to be best for you. But if we have a secure kind of escrow dynamic and a rating, a review, for example, an online review, if you cheat me and you cheat everyone, and all the reviews are bad, then no one will buy from you, and you can't cheat from anyone again, right? On the other hand, right, if you don't show up and pay the bill and all that, nobody will sell to you, right? And so that's what's called mutual self-interest. And what mutual self-interest does through transparency, like freedom of the press, keeping presidents somewhat honest, freedom of the press, a rotten cut, a business can do a terrible thing to a customer, and the customer can go in and say, do you really want this in the papers? And they don't care about the customer. We're dealing with a sociopath, but they care about the papers. So they can negotiate a win-win out of fear of exposure, right? So we're dealing with fear. We're dealing with intimidation and fear. Now, again, a tremendous amount of human behavior is in that territory. A tremendous amount of what is considered moral, doing the right thing, is in the context of, well, it would be very bad for me if people saw me doing this, and this. So I'm not going to do it openly, and it's too much work to keep it all secret. So I'll just do the right thing because it's expedient, right? Now, I would estimate that more than 50% of all human behavior on the planet to date, including today, happened out of a predominance of fear, right? If I do that, it's not going to look good. If I do that, you may say this, like, I wouldn't mind cheating on this person, but if that came out and, well, if this and this, well, then, so it's just too much trouble, so I'm not going to do it. If I told this lie, well, it might come round to so-and-so, and then okay, so I bet I need to tell the truth there. So it's kind of what would be called enlightened self-interest from a rational reptilian platform. If I treat my employees too badly, and it's a free market, they might go and work for somebody else. Then I wouldn't make any money. So, okay, I'd like to treat them badly, but I can't, right? And I just can't, because they've got other options. And that proves to be the case. Microsoft and Google both had to treat their employees better because they were vying for the same pool. So this is a very, so this is just going around us all the time. The reptilian brain is pure fight, flight, freeze. The rational reptile is fight, flight, freeze, please, manipulate, ass lick, right? But it's again out of greed and fear. Now, without this protocol, meaning the rational brain is very high competency to be able to predict the future based by mapping things out with language. It's incredibly competent. So the rational brain is what takes survival into the superabundance needed for security of survival. Right? And so these survival, security of survival, the first of our two human needs, the reptilian brain created enough competence for us to survive, right? So we're the 1% of the 1% that are here today, right? 99% of all the species on Earth didn't make it because they weren't quite as efficient as the species here, the plant species, the animal species, the human species that are here today. So, if you look at then the rational brain coming on top of survival and creating security of survival, still in a reptilian paradigm, the rational reptile, right? No empathy, but extreme strategy and manipulation of resources. So we get superabundance from that. The rational reptile has created more superabundance for human beings than any other species that we know of, right? Incredible superabundance. And we've got more superabundance on the planet today than we've ever had before, dealing, relationships between rational and reptilian protocols, right? I know if I screw you over too badly here, the word might get out, so I'm not going to do that. You know if this, and right, so we'll both, agree to do that. But that deteriorates if you deal with the same people in private rather than in public forum. It deteriorates. If there's anonymity, it deteriorates, right? As soon as there's zero risk or the perception of zero risk of consequences, that ethical behavior rapidly deteriorates for more than 50% of human interactions today. So you could say that at least 50% of all human interactions today are rational, they're reptilian, or they're rational reptile in the paradigm of enlightened self-interest. Right? So what that means is if you don't put consequences up, you will be exploited by a percentage of people if you want to just kind of engage with people you don't know very well. And I have found that to be the case. I didn't initially have a contract with clients until one woman said that she'd love to hire me to do a design. I did one. She did 75% of the ideas of the design and said, I'm not going to pay you for the design because I didn't install everything you designed. Like who knew that could be a thing, right? And I thought, this is absurd. But she looked at me with a straight face, right? And revealed, right, that people will blatantly steal and manipulate unless it's in writing. unless it's in writing. Apparently, you need to negotiate that if someone doesn't install every one of your consulting ideas, that they get a free consultation. I mean, if just one or two people, right, and that happened early on, if just one or two people are crazy or that sociopathic, then everyone needs to agree to that clause, right? So that's that. So then the need for a contract. Well, the contract has gotten longer over 30 years, right? As various insane people, right, or highly manipulative people try to take areas that aren't specifically spelled out and interpret them in very strange ways to their benefit, and then pretend, that I'm trying to rip them off, right? So, I learned that, for example, people who have credit card debt would like to pay their credit card down because they're paying 18% interest and string me along for a few months because there's nothing in the contract that says they pay me any interest. So I realized that if I want to be paid promptly, there needs to be a clause in there that says clients will pay me 18% interest for anything after 3 days after the job is done. Well, instantly that stops, right? I've never, ever had a client want to pay that 18% interest, right? So as soon as I'm level with their credit card debt, well, then I get paid promptly, right? Without any issue. Without that, they just think, who cares about Dane's cash flow, right? We can pay down our credit card and pay Dane in a few months, right? Because we just need another month. We just need another month, right? So that's the kind of thing where, bit after bit after bit after bit, the clauses go in, right, to deter reptilian behavior, sociopathic behavior, meaning it's expedient for them, but it's bad for me. And when I explain that and it's not in the contract, they're like, oh, well, that's life, right? Meaning we're going to do what we want to do, and screw you, right? So, this is disturbing. I was very upset at, having to box clients in to be treated well, right? Because my philosophy is I do more than agreed. I get my work done early. And in many cases, I start early, get it done early, no extra cost, and I do better than agreed, right? So it doesn't get any better than that, right? And that's, a lot of what happens in my work, right? So for a client to receive all that and then figure out some little way that they can push, for more or whatever, is I don't know. It's painful. It's like, yeah, it's painful, right? Because you give up a respectful, balanced exchange because you can get away with some little thing that destroys the trust and the goodwill in the relationship. And so the clauses are very fair, but they have to be there, or those territories are exploited by, say, 15% of clients, right? And then attorneys exploit not paying the last amount unless you put in a mediation clause, because, they figure, well, if they can go to court for free, right? So we're dealing with sociopathic people again and again and again and again, right? So to neutralize the territory with attorneys, both people agree to pay a mediator, and the mediator is final. So nothing goes to court, and the attorney doesn't have an edge. Then you can work for attorneys and get paid. But it's kind of lonely in that sense to realize that every one of these people doing these little loopholes are valuing a few $100 to a few $1,000 more than win-win, more than well-being, more than all of that, right? Now, if you've got a high reputation in power circles, you get treated well because people in power circles like to have good reputation with other people in power circles. But if you're low ranking, you can be treated terribly, right? And so because you have no reputational value in the power circle, right? So there's all these types of things that I just, learned year after year after year after year. Yeah, it's no fun, to recognize that, maybe 20% of people would treat me badly if it wasn't clearly spelled out. But that is the case, right? And so to be paid really well and treated really well, right? I have a detailed contract that covers these types of things. This is what design time is. This is what this is. This is what that is. And so people, do respect that. And for whatever reason, they also have more appreciation because of that. Right? So I get more praise, more money, and easier and more respect all at the same time, basically because I remember one woman who was, among the top 1% of manipulative and abusive clients. I just basically ended up charging her 30% more than any other client to deal with all of her, meandering, endless manipulations and time wasting. But she said to me at the end, she said, "You're really smart. You really figured out how not to be manipulated by all my games." It's like, well, I invented 3 or 4 protocols just for you, right? It's the first time I've needed them in 20 years, but just for you, I invented this, and this to navigate this, right? She was trying to punish her husband as much as possible through me, and her husband was to some extent trying to punish her through me, and it was a tricky thing because neither of them cared as much about the landscape as they did about punishing each other, which is a pretty sad and miserable state to be in for me and for them. But that was in 2008 when work cut down in half, right? So I just tacked 30% into my factoring of their costs because thankfully they told me in their very first meeting that they intended to punish each other in the most vicious ways possible. So and so I figured, well, that's going to take tons of hassle and work, so I'll just charge them 30% extra to process all their punishment. Which I did, right? And $30,000 was enough to go on a nice vacation afterwards and, recuperate, rather than be without work. But that is, and these are, of course, always the liberal Waldorf school. They were sending their kids to Waldorf school and great New Age this and New Age that, probably Lazaris friends at one point or another. It's always crazy. My parents would betray agreements to me constantly until I would have to write out, by age 10, I was writing out contracts with my parents because the assholes would just lie, then lie that they had lied, and then punish me for bringing it up, right? So by the time there's 3 punishments and getting nothing out of it other than to be shamed 3 times, that's enough, right? So you say you're going to do this, sign here. You say you never signed here, look at the damn contract, right? You're too hypocritical to live up to it, well, be another Lazaris New Age hypocrite, right? That's also my parents were my first exposure to Lazaris friends. It's very, very painful to be betrayed and lied to and realize that you're just an addiction or an expedient source. And then it's very painful to have that denied, that no, it never happened, and your feelings about it are void. And then 3, to be punished for bringing up that, yes, it did, right? It's 3 layers of loneliness and invisibility. It's very painful. But they would grudgingly do what they said in writing, right? So I guess my parents were preparing me for American business. But that's pretty shitty. And the question is, right, Lazaris doesn't have special friends that are separate from the culture. Concept synergy, right, is Penny talked about when she was building her compound in Orlando, telling the carpet company that she was a wholesaler, or Michael telling the carpet company that he was a wholesaler. And Penny thought it was great that they were ripping off the carpet company by 50% by pretending to be a wholesaler, right? Of course, she would have been furious if anyone did that to Concept Synergy, but great when it's the other way around. In other words, Penny's sociopathic to other people, but righteously indignant when anyone does that to her. And, no different from my parents, or I'm sure, any of the clients that, want to rip things off there. But the question is, if you're in a cultural world dynamic where, let's say, 50 to 70% of all human behavior is done by fear and greed and or enlightened self-interest, and not out of some deep spiritual transcendent or whatever, then, first of all, did life make a mistake for generating the reptilian brain and the 200 million year filtering and competitive process that saw the strongest species prevail over the less intelligent and weaker species, and the strongest members of the strongest species become dominant in those species, the alpha ape and all that? Is that a mistake? Well, you can call it whatever you want, but Earth has probably brought 1,000,000 times more competency to bear, right? What's present today in humans and animals today is perhaps 1,000,000 times more competent than what would be present without that fight, flight, freeze competitive protocol. Meaning if Earth just said, there's going to, this is a slow chicken, that's a slow lion, and we're just going to compartmentalize, and there's going to be a place, equal space for every species and every competency level of that species, and that's the way it is, Earth would be about 1,000,000 times less competent, at least 1,000 times less competent. Now the question is, could you focus on, if you had so little competence to generate resources, could you have security of survival? Meaning when you have really, really dumb people and really, really dumb animals that can't create superabundance, well then, how do you get survival, security? Like if everyone's dumb, right? Go plant the wheat. What's wheat? It's a grain. How do I plant it? I put it in the ground and then they throw it in the air. Like if you're so dumb that you can't do anything, how do you create superabundance? And the answer is you don't. So there is no security of survival without massive increases in competency. And what life has done with the fight, flight, freeze sociopathic protocol is it has killed off all patterns of energy that are not entirely competent and left us with the 1%. And then it has created dominance hierarchies within that set of species, including human beings, where the top 1% of humans and the top 1% of apes and the top 1% of rabbits and all of that breed more and get more access to more resources, more money, more sex, more of our different energy forms. So life is not doing a bad job. Now, the question is it love? Right? Is it love to breed for competency so that security becomes a possibility? Because you could say it's love to let everything live and be and all naturally and, compartmentalized regardless of competency of species and regardless of competency within the species, kind of a global communism. But life has not adopted communism in the species interactions, right? The strongest, fastest, most intelligent lion is the most well-fed and has the most mating options. That's life's expression, right? It's not a no, you killed it and let's share it all with everyone else. So life is very reptilian in that stage of development. And human life is emerging on the shoulders of that, billion-year protocol of survival of the intelligent. Now, you can have cooperative survival of that, right, where you have alliances and all of that dynamic. But nonetheless, certain cultures are on the ascent and other cultures have died out. 95% of all cultures known to Earth are dead. Their languages, their belief systems, and their people are dead, right? So 5% remain, and of those, the 500 or so of the 10,000 that remain, the Western culture is dominant. It's moving towards China at this point. So China is going to be the most dominant culture in the next 50 years as things are going. And why? Well, they've got more people, so a bigger possibility field. They're working harder than Americans. They're working smarter than Americans, and they're doing more of a group effort rather than the individual cult. They're doing the culture cult, right? So we're all Han, Chinese. They're thinking long-term, we're thinking short-term. They're thinking group, we're thinking individual, right? So they are on the ascent. And as they ascend and get global currency reserve status, et cetera, the US dollar and economy will go down. Ray Dalio has done some good work about the rise and fall of nations in that pattern. But the U.S. might get its act together in a way that it has very little chance of doing so out of sheer greed and fear of giving up dominant status to the Chinese. In that sense, the Chinese, the competitor, is the most likely to draw out the best in the United States in some ways, as well as the worst, right? Because when you're focusing on survival, you've got greed, you've got fear, you've got a willingness to sink into the shadow to maintain identity, that you don't have when you're secure in that. So you often see the darkest side of a person or a culture in its descent, in its losing of some aspect of its identity. But I don't think we could have security of survival without high competence survival. And life's protocol for that is fight, flight, freeze. You fight what's smaller than you and you take the energy. You run from what's bigger than you and try and escape it. You freeze when neither of those options are expedient. And you ass-lick, if you're a human being with a rational brain, you try and find powerful people to, say, okay, I'll secure your power if you suck up. If you'll protect me, I'll suck up to you, I'll secure your power, right? So you have that, all around New Age gurus, including Jach. If Jach loses his channel status, right, then, all those little sycophantic type energies trying to look great to Jach, I'll praise you and say how wonderful you are, and I won't look at your faults. Right? They all go to whoever is on the ascent, right? because it's not based on genuine respect. It's based on fear and greed and wanting to look good and what that means, which you can easily bring into the, quote, spiritual area, right? And just be the most spiritual person. So, anyway, rational reptile is still fear and greed based. Now, it's only when the rational reptile creates so much superabundance for ourselves personally or for our species that we begin to move into the empathic brain being the dominant brain. When you're deeply secure in your survival. It's no fun to be a reptile. It's no fun to be a rational reptile. I mean, it's more fun to be on top than on the bottom in a dominance hierarchy, but they're cold, they're sociopathic, they're lonely. There's a lot of anxiety around it. It's not a lot of fun. So to be able to love and to give and to care and all of that on the upper side of security is wonderful, really, truly wonderful. But you have to have security financially, physically, legally, right? Mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually. When you have superabundance and a security based on your competence, which, as I say, is bred through millions of years of sociopathic fight, flight, freeze protocol, and then the rational brain being developed over the last some thousands of years, right? So millions of years of competency physiologically, rational brain over the last, maybe 10,000 years. Well, in that dynamic, empathy, right? You have the need for survival, the need for security of survival, and then the need for love and belonging. The third need rests on the foundation of that competence. Now, many people in the Lazaris community, myself included, do not have security of survival, right? Love and belonging is a tenuous, unmet need. There's loneliness there, there's frustration there, there's distrust there, there's disappointment there, there's hurt there, there's trauma there, right? Because, we weren't raised with parents that knew much about love and belonging, right? And so our role models don't know a lot about love and belonging. What's more is there's a lot of poor Lazaris friends and a lot of poor employees of Concept Synergy. By poor, I mean minimal investments, uncertainty and fear about the future around money, not not ranking that high, financially, uncertainty, debt, the dynamic, right? So if you survey, the entire contents of someone in a Lazaris seminar, how many of you are debt-free? How many of you are very secure in your job over the next 10 years? How many of you have a good retirement fund, right? How many of you are in great health? How many of you are free of addictions? How many of you are tracking up in a stable way, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, etc., and just have a strong sense based on current and past experience that you're going into a good place, right? If you track that, we're dealing with about 10% of the room can say all of those in the affirmative, right? At least 80% of the room is in shaky ground. So to move from survival and insecurity to love and belonging is not a natural progression, right? You have to develop your competence to a level where I'm just getting to some of that. My physical body is at 30% of what I'd like it to be. Right? I'm exhausted. I have, a strange sensation in one ear. I have aches and pains. There's a heaviness in my breath, right? There's not, I'm just talking about physiologically. There's muscle cramps at times. I don't have a lot of security around my body. My finances have gone from desperate about 7 years ago to stronger than they've ever been. And they're kind of getting to a point where I don't need to think about money anymore. And that helps enormously in kind of moving towards love and belonging as a primary operating system. But there's still, a tremendous amount of uncertainty and anxiety. It might, how vulnerable am I to an internet attack that could wipe out all my accounts, for example, right? I'm aware that I'm in a reptilian environment where naivete is punished severely. Identity theft happens all the time, and, there isn't anyone that's particularly interested in getting all my funds back if that happens, right? The police can barely respond to a stolen car. It's a pretty vulnerable situation in that sense, right? And so, there's a movement towards security of that dynamic, and I feel so much better, than I did, 7 years ago when I was going through a very low traumatic period with tremendous uncertainty. But that's, so that's there, right? And emotionally, I'm somewhat in touch with myself, right? And learning how to self-love to some degree. So love and belonging is there. But what I find is that whether it's my clients, my lover, my employees, governments, that if there is not a reptilian level, i.e. if I'm not dealing in a kind of a legal or clear agreement framework where there are consequences for shitty behavior, I get way more shitty behavior just because it's expedient, right? And so, so I would say that I would probably hire a security desk if I was Concept Synergy as well. If I was Jach, I might also refuse to give health benefits to employees, particularly if they were crappy employees and not iterating. My biggest fight with my employees is they love to be doobies. They're all nice people. They're all hard-working physically, but not one of them wants to think. It's incredible how stupid they are. It's mind-numbing. But what's more mind-numbing than the stupidity, because everyone learning something new is doesn't know, of course, is how comfortable they are in stupidity. And the third is how much they resist, right? I have to do enormous manipulations to get growth. Incredible. I remember a battle for an entire year to get them to put power tools into a covered area before going home. Right? I mean, it's mind-numbing that it wouldn't occur to anyone, but it's also mind-numbing that I'd have to repeat myself. Now, this went on until I said, next time I see power tools out in the rain, there's going to be $50 fine shared between all of you. Now, it's nothing compared to all the loss in power tools. Well, of course, they ignored that. Well, then they got a $50 fine. This was $12 each. Oh, you should have seen the livid reaction. $12. This is my money, right? But the power tools got put away. Now, that's sheer domination. Sheer, it's basically saying you're so dumb and so irresponsible. You're so untrustworthy. Now, I would fire them all and get other ones if I could. But these are the best of 300 employees. The best of 300 employees. And they're this dumb, this out to lunch when it's my money. But just $12 cleared the whole thing up. It was amazing. Now, I felt shitty. I resisted it. I mean, I just felt so shitty to these nice people to say, look, I'm going to fine you some money because you're not doing what I ask. And it's costing the company a lot of money. Now, as I say, I would fire them and get others, but if they're the best of 300 people, that's not the answer, right? I tried that, 300 times, right? So if they're the best of 300 people and they're still dumb and they're still sociopathic, then here's a tiny little bit of what it's costing me. How do you feel about it? Oh, they changed it like that. And so domination is necessary when you're dealing with people in a reptilian state. It's necessary. And it's I have had to do this with my parents. I've had to do this with my clients. I've had to do this with my employees. And my present lover lies right and left. Right and left. Oh, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. Oh, where is it? Oh, I forgot. Oh, I forgot. 100 times. And so, okay, there's going to be a consequence. That'll cost you $100. I remember, right? So, right? How lonely? Again, even worse than employees, to give a financial penalty to a lover? It's the only thing she respects, right? After about 50 times of saying, this really feels bad, right? And again, so why not get rid of her and get someone else? Well, I've done that 100 times, right? 100 lovers. And she's the best lover in a number of areas. So that I look at, I could go back to that person, 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 I could go, but they're not compatible in this area. That's not a great thing. Arguing with them, like the Lazaris lovers, are some of the worst, right? All, creative. Okay. So this is what makes the relationship work, right? I'll give you money gifts when things are going really well, and I'll penalize you when you lie to me. And of course, you can leave at any time, whatever, but that seems to work, right? How fucked up is that? It's incredible. But I do not know how to meet someone like me, apparently, right? And so that's on me, right? I haven't met someone like me, right? I'd love to, absolutely love to, but right, I haven't, right? Because I make agreements very carefully. And then I do, like in this relationship, I've done about 10 times more than I agreed to do in all the ways that I would like to receive, right? But, I have to do little bribes and penalties to get back some of the things that are important for the relationship to work. So what does that say, right? I think Lazaris is, first of all, not giving credit to the reptilian stage of evolution, number one. Number two, Lazaris is not acknowledging that the majority of human behavior today is rational reptile, right? Even if, the way I look at it is most of the decisions today are getting made by 60% fear and 30% it's the right thing. So the way it kind of works is if I want someone to do something good, an employee, whatever, like I say, please improve your skills so I can give you more money as a raise. They don't want to do that, right? So the combination of giving them a penalty plus a bonus if they do it, plus asking them nicely, plus criticizing them when asking them nicely doesn't work, plus threatening to fire them when that doesn't work. The combination of all that fear, plus it being win, like I say, this is good for you, it's good for the customer, it's good for me, it's good for our relationship, and it's good for the business. Everyone wins if you start getting more intelligent. Everyone, right? You want more money, right? Here's the path. Just do this. Stop ruining the tools. Do this, do this, do this, right? And then I'll give you more money. So that motivates them 30%, but nowhere near enough to, to make a change. They say, oh, nice idea. Then they just carry on doing the same stupid stuff. But if you do 60% fear, meaning they're motivated 60% fear, so if I put something negative in and reward them, then it happens. Right? So if people are 60% motivated by fear, there has to be enough to flip that switch towards the desired behavior. It's sheer manipulation. I don't like doing it. It's lonely. It's disgusting, frankly. Like, why do you need that? Right? But they do. They do, right? I would say, in my observation, 60%. Now, so you've got to then have like I think one of the presidents say, talk peace and carry a big stick was kind of the principle, right? And so that's basically what this is. Now, I have no idea if Concept Synergy employees are any better than my employees, right? I have no idea, right? But it's perfectly probable, based on my experience, right, that they stay stuck in a rut and don't learn and don't figure out how to make more money and stop these expenses bleeding out and stuff like that. My employees never do that proactively. So I have to set up the structure that way. And so if there's a fault for not noticing millions of years of evolution, the fact that all of our love and belonging on an empathic operating system is resting on superabundance that is generated by millions of years of sociopathic behavior. Basically, whichever was the big one fed on the small one, and the big ones got stronger and iterated and all of that. So Lazaris is just out to lunch by pretending that dominion and domination are the exact opposite. Because the way it looks is that being a very competent reptile allows your species to be one of the 1% that makes it on the planet. And then by being a rational reptile as a human animal, right, then we ascend as the dominant species amongst those dominant things. And then the smartest reptiles, like the Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, very reptilian individuals, accumulate the most resources within that thing in a very sociopathic. If you read Bill Gates' biography, it's incredibly fear-based, sociopathic, and analytical mass and bullying dynamic. Like, why did he end up with 60% and Steve Allen end up with so much little less of the Microsoft stock? It's because Bill Gates was more dominant, more in the fight mode, and Steve Allen didn't want to fight with him, right? And so Bill pushed him into a lower position. And so rational reptile, fight, flight, right? So that's the dynamic. Similarly with Woz and Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, right? Fight, flight. Wozniak was just as important to Apple as Jobs. So why did Steve end up with 100 times more money than Woz? dominance, fight, flight, right? So that's going on, and it's working in a sense. And the empathic love and belonging brain, in which you do not select Lazaris friends by whether they speak English, rich, and can pay thousands of dollars for seminars and hotels, rich, right? If Lazaris was in the empathic brain, the two questions of an empath and the empathic operating system are who is in the most pain and how can we help? That tells you you're in empathic territory. If you're in sociopathic territory, it's how can I get more of what I want? Well, which protocol are you using? There's a bunch of homeless people out there that are representing who's in the most pain. And there's lots of things that we can do to help. Are we doing them? Is Lazaris doing them? Or is he talking to rich people who have less physiological concerns and can afford his seminars, right? So that's sociopathic. How can I get the most, right? And usually you're dealing with the alpha with the strong in that territory. So I don't think it is hypocritical for concept synergy to make money selling a dominion thing and then practice domination. It's also hypocritical of Lazaris to sell tapes on dominion, right, and make tapes on dominion while existing in 60% sociopathic territory. And I think it's also a mistake to see these as kind of going in the opposite direction. It doesn't seem to be, right? We are here today because we spent millions of years in the reptilian brain and hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of years in the rational reptilian brain. And that is creating more and more superabundance. Now, there is a natural point, right, as we move towards superabundance as an entire species, as a planet, and then as a multiplanetary species. Being a rational reptile, calculating every cost, keeping tabs, punishing people for bad acting, kicking them off the forum and all, that is so not fun. It is so miserable compared to being empathic and loving. It's absolute hellhole to be a rational reptile. It's lonely, it's numb, it's so disappointing compared to being an empathic lover. But if there isn't enough, because there isn't enough competency, then there will be this continual vying for scarce resources, right? Now, at some level, incompetence, at some level in the rational reptile, this scarcity disappears because it is illusionary. The only reason you can be in a vast world of energy, on a vast planet with massive amounts of resources and have scarcity, is profound stupidity. So we're still at a level of the species where we have a tremendous amount of stupidity. And so we have a tremendous amount of cruelty as we divvy up scarce resources because we're too dumb to create abundant resources at this time. We have not created abundant resources for every human being. We're dumb. We've been dumb, we are dumb, and we will continue to be dumb for some period of time. But as the rational reptile continues to evolve in its sociopathic state, at some level, whether through robotics, through AI, through multiplanetary progression, through just the information age, publishing enough stuff that we can all read all the books we ever wanted to read about success. At some point in that process, we reach superabundance for all. So at that point, it no longer makes any sense to fight over, do you have $100 million when I wanted, and I want, and I only have $200 million, It's just so dumb at some point to fight over such superabundance. When it becomes more and more meaningless, the more you have, the more meaningless things are. So at that point, when you can choose love and belonging because it's fun, because it's easier, it's so much more fun and more successful than domination and control. Then people will lift into it because it's fun, not because it's spiritual, not because Lazaris told them to, right? But as long as people are scarce, i.e. incompetent, then sociopathic behavior will continue to bring out the smarts. Like you have dumb spiritual people that can't tell the difference between a sociopath and an empath. So they get taken by sociopaths because they're dumb. Not because they're so spiritual that they're taken, no, because they're dumb. Now, reptilian people teach naive spiritual people to not be dumb. And eventually they learn it from reptiles who teach them how not to be dumb, right? Now, once there are no more dumb people on the planet being taken advantage of by sociopaths, sociopaths have a lot more work. Then they have to, at some point, if people are smart enough, sociopaths will find it easier to just work for a living rather than screw everyone else over. So then they will, right? Well, then there will be no more sociopaths, right? And then we have more working people, more competent people, less dumb people, more superabundance. Then loving becomes more fun, right? So it just happens, right? So that progression from reptile, unconscious reptile, to rational conscious reptile with enlightened self-interest to superabundance for all, we're moving in that direction in the next 1,000 years. Then who wants to be a reptile when you can love and be loved? Because it's more fun. Plus, by then, people actually have good techniques that work, right? And they can experience and simulations and all kinds of different things like, I want to be loved and I want to love, right? Well, then we move into the empathic brain, which will create even more superabundance, which then can warm the psyche, warm the self to a point of the transcendent brain where we can remember, reconnect with being part of all that is and become all that is, become part of all that is, become aware of all that is. And then the last remnants of sociopathic behavior disappear, not because they're bad, whatever, but because why would you manipulate who you are, right? So I do not judge concept synergy for hiring private security guards. I think Lazaris could do a 10x better job at kind of discussing some of these controversies and stuff like this. I think that I think it's important to understand that the reptilian principle that is active on the planet today is still doing a lot of job, or it's doing a lot of useful things by reducing naivete, stimulating growth, stimulating intimacy, into me you see, right? Because, if you're naive and you're dumb because you're naive, you can't love a sociopath because you can't even see them, right? You say, oh, they're just trying to be nice to me because you're dumb, right? So how can you be effective in relationship with a sociopath? How are they to respect you when they realize that you're more dumb than they are? Why would they want to be more like you? But if you can see the sociopath, if you can cut off the manipulation of the sociopath effectively, and then you can show a way for the sociopath with enlightened self-interest to have more fun and more success, then at some point they may be interested in moving into empathic territory. But not to someone who's so dumb they can't even see that they're dealing with a sociopath. Right? And so that's, and unfortunately, when you're talking about, positive thinking and all of that, it's just a bit dumb in some ways, right? And so you get a lot of, veiled sociopathic behavior in there because it's rewarded. So those are my thoughts today about this.